Today on Little Wars TV, we wargame one of the most famous operations of World War I, with 12 players across 3 linked tabletops.
Gallipoli. Its very name is synonymous with defeat, hopeless sacrifice, military folly.
The Gallipoli disaster toppled the British government and cost Winston Churchill his job as First Lord of the Admiralty.
And yet, long after the war, Churchill continued to insist it was a sound plan.
Yeah, good plan with bad execution. Was he right?
Our war game puts Churchill's long-standing contention to the test. We'll allow the British a second chance to plan a new operation with some key advantages they did not enjoy in 1915.
Today we find out if the Dardanelles campaign could have worked under different, more favorable circumstances with our unique what-if scenario. Commanding the Allied invasion, we have a guest player, a real-life Lieutenant General.
Oh boy, now I'm worried.
As you should be, right? This is the first time in Little Wars TV history that we have an actual general commanding. Opposing him on the other side, we've called in one of the biggest historians on YouTube. With over 2 million subscribers, you know him as the Armchair Historian. It's a clash of titans to find out once and for all if the Ottoman Empire can be knocked out of the war with one powerful punch.
Join us right now on Little Wars TV. The grand and glorious adventure of the Great War had already sunk into a sea of mud and carnage by the start of 1915. The Dardanelles campaign was promoted by Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, as a way to break the stalemate on the Western Front and take pressure off the Russians. Churchill imagined a naval attack against Constantinople might knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war and fundamentally shift the balance of power in favor of the Allies.
In theory, not an unreasonable plan.
It was creative at a time when strategic creativity was in short supply.
Churchill's plan caught on with the other members of the war cabinet. The advantages of such a scheme were appealing. With outdated battleships, a British and French fleet could bombard the Turkish coastal defenses into submission and take a relatively short route up the straits directly to Constantinople. Opening up the Black Sea would reopen supply lines to Russia, force the Turks out of the war, and apply pressure for Greece and the Balkan countries to join the Allies.
There was considerable debate about the need for a joint Army-Navy operation, but Lord Kitchener, the Supreme British Military Commander, remained opposed to landing boots on the ground. He believed the Navy alone, with a second-rate fleet of old warships, could force the straits.
Ed, when you read the historical letters and accounts from 1915, there's a palpable disrespect for the Turks.
The Ottoman Empire was the sick man of Europe, and the British assumed they would roll over. It proved a historically bad assumption. The Allied naval bombardment began on the morning of February 19, 1915. It was immediately clear the Turks were not going to fold. Progress up the strait was painfully slow, and constant artillery fire from Turkish guns pounded the Allied fleet.
Even as the naval attack is underway, the British War Cabinet is undecided whether they want to commit the army or not.
Contingency plans were drawn up for the possibility, but Kitchener kept changing his mind. When the Secretary of State for War reluctantly committed to a land invasion, the entire operation was hastily rushed forward in just 5 weeks. 9 Allied divisions were hurried to assembly points in Egypt, and a field commander, Sir Ian Hamilton, was thrust into the role.
The War Cabinet expected Hamilton to clear the entire peninsula in the matter of 3 days, at an expected cost of 5,000 Allied casualties. With the Turkish forts neutralized, the Navy could freely steam to Constantinople and bully the capital into surrender. Of course, we all know the tragic outcome. 3 days turned into 9 fruitless months.
5,000 projected casualties turned into nearly 150,000.
The Turks suffered even more ghastly losses, but they held on tenaciously. In January 1916, the entire Allied army evacuated the peninsula in defeat. Churchill's alluring, seemingly low-cost plan had turned into a high-cost nightmare.
Well, gee, Josh, that sounds fun to wargame.
Yeah, not really, right? It doesn't. So we're going to try something completely new. Winston Churchill aggressively defended his record on Gallipoli and offered a laundry list of reasons why his idea had been sound, but the execution was wrong. In our wargame, we'll test Churchill's argument by exploring a few historically plausible what-if changes.
What if the Allied fleet carried a proper supply of high-explosive shells instead of armor-piercing ammunition?
What if, using the benefit of hindsight, Sir Ian Hamilton could have planned a different landing with different beaches?
The Allied divisions involved were new, untested formations. Could they have pulled in an experienced crack formation to be the tip of the spear?
Turkish naval mines proved exceptionally dangerous, sinking multiple battleships. What if the British hadn't relied on civilian minesweeping crews?
What about the big one? Churchill insisted that if only the invasion had occurred a month sooner, they would have faced much less resistance.
He's right about that, but remember when I said we're only going to test historically plausible ideas? If you read the historical records, moving up the invasion a month simply was not going to happen. The planning was too haphazard, and the resistance from Kitchener too steadfast. Churchill himself acknowledged the challenges in his account of the Great War, the world crisis.
The workings of Lord Kitchener's mind constituted at this period a feature almost as puzzling as the Great War problem itself. His prestige and authority were immense. When he gave a decision, it was invariably accepted as final. Yet behind this imposing and splendid front lay many weaknesses, evidences of which became increasingly disquieting. The Secretary of State for War had burdens laid upon him which no man, no 3 men even of his great capacity, could properly discharge.
All right then, Lord Kitchener isn't going to let us move up the invasion date. I think there's one more what-if on our list that we have to nix. I tried to find them in my research, but there simply were no veteran troops available in the spring of 1915 to send to the eastern Mediterranean. Churchill had this to say on the possibility of drawing down veteran troops from the Western Front.
In cold blood, it could never have been done. General Headquarters and the French General Staff would have succeeded in shattering any plan put forward so long as it was a mere theoretical proposal for a large diversion of force to the southern theatre. At one moment, they would have told us that, owing to the Russian failure, great masses of Germans were returning to the west to deliver an overwhelming offensive. At another, that they could not spare a round of ammunition and were in desperate straits for the want of it. At a third, that they had a wonderful plan for a great offensive which would shatter the German line and drive them out of a large portion of France.
Well, that's definitive. Adding veteran troops is simply not historically plausible.
No, but the other what-if changes are all within reason. The question is, with these new advantages, can the Allies turn Gallipoli from a disaster into some kind of battlefield success?
I'm the umpire for today's wargame, which includes 10 players divided into 2 teams. Here are our 5 Allied field officers. Here are our 5 Ottoman field officers. All of these players are divisional or brigade officers responsible for maneuvering troops on the battlefield. They are not in overall command. We have 2 guest commanders operating at a distance. They are responsible for drawing up plans and issuing orders.
Hi, I'm Griffin Johnsen, the Armchair Historian, and I'll be taking the role of the overall Ottoman commander. When I was in high school, I found crossfire rules for the World War II over a couple summers with friends from high school, and I think that's what got me into World War II, or just wargaming in general. I've never done something on this kind of scale, though, so it was really interesting to be part of this, and I do very much appreciate you guys putting me into this position, which also had a lot of responsibility.
Hello, I'm Rhys Jones, a retired general from the New Zealand Army and an avid historian of the Gallipoli campaign. In this campaign, I'm playing General Ian Hamilton, the overall commander of the Allied operation. I've been a wargamer since school, and my brother and I were into it with the Airfix plastic models. So the highest profile wargaming thing was I was involved in the organising of painters for the figures for Peter Jackson's World War I exhibition here in New Zealand. I was the executive director for that.
As the umpire, I provided both of our overall commanders a theater map, orders of battle, and their objectives. You can see those objectives noted on the map, and these locations represent Ottoman forts, logistical hubs, and the 3 most important peaks. The historical British plan called for the capture of all objectives on the map within about 3 days. And just to give you a sense of how poorly that went in 1915, Here are the only objectives the Allies secured in the historical operation. Let's start by checking in with our overall Ottoman commander, Griffin. I required him to place elements of the 11th Division in Asia Minor and hold elements of the 7th Division off the northern map edge, but I allowed him more freedom to deploy his two largest formations, the 9th Division, commanded by Tom, and the 19th Division, commanded by John.
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge for me was the enemy could dump everything at Solva Bay in the north, or they could dump everything in the south, and there's just so much ground to cover. And at any point, the peninsula could get cut off. So that made it a little bit challenging to figure out, especially because I was only deploying one division in depth. I also took just a massive gamble, just for fun, I guess, that I really wanted to anticipate that the Allied landings would be further in the north because there's so much open beach. And again, looking at the map, that I figured something big would have to land there if they wanted to get a lot of forces. I didn't really care about the far south quite as much because it's one giant road, one set of heights a little further back. And I also figured that the commander wouldn't want to recreate what happened historically, where the southern tip was the focus. So I figured if they're using hindsight, and I don't see many logistics targets, it's like one road, not many victory points, that I would really try to gamble everything in the far north.
I was expecting the Turks to understand, that north is going to be the key to it. It's the more rugged terrain, it's the more defensive terrain. And if they occupy that, they can bottle me up. So I was expecting them to expect me to be landing in Suvla Bay.
Well, here we go. We already have mind games between the two commanders, each trying to guess what the other's going to do. Griffin's deployment is heavily concentrated in the north to bottle up the large beach of Solva Bay, but you just heard General Rhys Jones anticipate that defensive strategy with perfect accuracy. If our real-life general has already predicted this strategy from the Turks, how is he going to approach this puzzle?
The real bottom line for any amphibious operation is you need to capture surprise, because your only advantage is at surprise where you can actually gain numerical firepower superiority at the point of contact. So my approach, my strategy was, how do I maximize surprise? So how do I take away any reason for the Turks to be in a position to oppose those landings? So yes, I did forego the option of pushing naval vessels up and potentially securing beaches. So I was really putting the gambling on how can I get on the beaches really easily or as quickly as I can, and then how do I use that fleeting moment of surprise to really push in hard to go for those objectives. So that really shaped that plan of saying, I won't do anything that'll foreshadow an operation here.
I was genuinely stunned to see our Allied commander decline all three pre-invasion options open to him. He did not want to push the Navy into the straits to open up additional beaches. He did not want to make any diversionary landings to distract the Turks. He even declined the option for pre-invasion bombardment to soften up enemy positions. Historically, the British performed all three of these options, but our overall commander clearly has a different plan 110 years later. Declining all three options in order to maximize surprise and move up the invasion timetable had some interesting implications for our wargame. First, it meant that Griffin received 0 pre-game intelligence reports. Second, the Turks had no opportunity to adjust their initial deployments. And third, it meant that Griffin would only receive a very limited number of improved entrenchments and barbed wire obstacles. And here is where Griffin decided to build up his limited defensive improvements.
If anyone has ever been to the Gallipoli Peninsula, it is incredibly tough terrain. Incredibly. Suvla Bays is flat. Hellas is reasonably flat until you get into the hills there. So you really had to think about where did you want to fight and how you wanted the battle to progress there. My core objective that I gave to the Corps was the clearing of the forts to allow the naval assets to come into the straits. And so, ensuring that those southern forts were covered, became quite important in there. However, I did know that the big battles, the important battles, were going to be in the north. How do you actually stop Turkish reinforcements coming south? That's why the best troops that I knew were the best troops, although at the time the British didn't know they were the best troops, were at the north. So, even though I was quite heavy, to guarantee that I could knock off those southern forts and therefore allow other minesweepers to come in to clear the way for the Navy if that eventuated, so that they could then support the battles in the north. And going for that strategic aim, it's to clear the strait so the Navy can go through.
With the operational planning phase complete, our 2 overall commanders now issued written orders to our players. And if you want to see those written orders for yourself and read them, I'm making them available on our website under the free stuff section. They're pretty fun to read and worth checking out. And now it's time to put those written orders into effect and transition our wargame to the tabletop. I knew wargaming the initial landings would be time consuming and not the most tactically interesting part of the day. So I came up with a way to resolve the outcome of the landings as the umpire. My system considered a number of factors, including whether the landings were actually on target, the relative number of attackers versus defenders, availability of offshore battleships, presence of defensive positions, and the difficulty of the terrain at each beach. Let me walk you through the outcome of the landing rolls so you can see how the invasion got underway. We'll start at Cape Helles in the south, where Ed's 29th Division is landing at multiple beaches. The landing at Y Beach is unopposed, allowing the 87th Brigade to advance toward their objective. The other beaches see light engagement, although the Turks rolled well enough to bottle up X Beach and keep Ed contained. Moving up the peninsula, 2 Australian battalions find K Beach undefended and rapidly move to cut the peninsula. This particular move has significant ramifications. It means that the peninsula has been cut in half and Krithia in the south, where the Cape Helles table is now isolated. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Things do not go nearly as well at Z Beach, where Griffin smartly placed wire and machine guns on the cliffs. The 2nd Australian Brigade suffers heavy losses and is pinned down. The same fate should have befallen the Aussies at Z2 above Gavatepe. The terrain here is rugged and it was well defended, but some miraculous die rolling for the Allies combined with heavy naval bombardment allow the Australians to get off the beach and start moving into the hills. It's worth noting that while he declined the option for preparatory bombardment, General Jones did allocate the fleet for fire support the morning of the invasion, and he concentrates heavy firepower at Gavatepe, mercilessly pounding the Turks with big gun battleships. The New Zealanders land at N Beach, rolling well enough to start moving inland. This leaves the French, led in our game by Miles. Historically, they were deployed in Asia Minor, and our Allied commander opted to do the same. A squadron of naval assets was made available to silence the Ottoman forts at Kumkale, allowing Miles and the French troops to move ashore with relative ease. With the invasion underway, it is time to put miniatures on the tabletop. Here's our situation on the morning of the invasion. Already the Allies are faring much better than they did historically. I've set up 3 tabletops representing the areas I suspect will see the heaviest fighting today. Movement between the tabletops will be permitted, so we're looking at a very fluid situation. But this is not the map I've provided to the overall commanders. Just before our miniatures wargame, I emailed Griffin and General Jones situational maps based on what they could reasonably learn from the frontline reports. Here's the Allied map and what they can see. It looks quite favorable, though most of the Ottoman reserves have not been detected. Now here's the Ottoman map. You'll immediately notice that Griffin has no visibility at Cape Helles, because if you recall, communications have been cut. He also has no visibility on Asia Minor, thanks to a poor die roll I made for Ottoman messages this morning. Griffin is missing a lot of key information, and as his sub-commanders gather on the morning of battle for a conference, the limited information they do have is grim.
We are pretty right now. This looks way worse for the Turks right now, at this moment, than it did historically.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Like, they are not held up on the beaches. They are deep inland at multiple points.
Yeah, I was surprised by the picture he sent.
Yeah.
I was like, what, did I miss a couple of turns?
What happened?
I concur. You know, our overall position here in the center of this map is hanging in the air. And we just don't have the troops.
No, I mean, our only real reserve with any punch is Tom. You know, your division is the uncommitted division that Griffin kind of deployed as a reserve for us. And when I saw the deployment, I was like, oh, that was smart. That's great. We've got a powerful uncommitted reserve. The problem is there's like 5 different places where we need you right now.
Exactly.
Tom's powerful 9th Division is deployed at Bogali. Tom makes a formal request for his men to be released south to prevent the peninsula from being cut in half. But the threat to the high ground at Saribert is also urgent. Where will Griffin direct the 9th Division to counterattack? As you might imagine, the mood among the Allied players is more upbeat. Well, chipper, in fact.
Good Lord. Our objectives are the 3 coastal forts on the north side of the straits. We're in a race we're damn well gonna win. It's a 3-way race. Johnny Turk and the French. They're not gonna steal the prize from us. My plans for today? Push hard, push fast, push resolutely, push without mercy. Assuming we take the objective, casualties are of no importance. Grand plans are in motion, and it's too late to turn back. Decisions have been made, forces committed, and it's up to the lads on the front line to rewrite history at Gallipoli. Next time on Little Wars TV, we hit the tabletop with 6mm miniatures across 3 interconnected boards. There will be heroic stands, desperate counterattacks, and surprising decisions in the heat of battle that could change everything. It's all coming up next in part 2.
If you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, what are you waiting for? Ed didn't get dressed up for nothing.